So welcome to the Abundancia Mindset on how to start your Airbnb business. And here's a little bit about me, a little time frame. It's more of a reminder to show you that anybody can start, even if you're starting out with debt, can accomplish whatever it is that you're looking at. But in my case, started off with college, had a lot of debt, and it took me a few years to get out of debt, just like many of you. And at some point, I decided to focus a lot on personal finance to kind of help out my sisters, my friends, and everyone around me. And that's how I got started. And as I started learning more about personal finance, I realized I could focus a lot on side hustles, right? And through side hustles, I discovered things like flipping pallets, like doing Airbnb as we're doing now, and quite a few other things, right? So that's been my experience. And as of today, 2022, I've expanded to a secondary Airbnb unit. This is a townhome that I bought, and still trying to do it. As always, still learning. So let's keep it going. And hopefully, this serves a value to you and your loved ones. So let's continue. So before we started, I'd like to always remind, there's a few things that you should probably take care of, right, on your personal finance journey. So one of them is just try to get out of debt, try to increase your income, which is something we're trying to do even with the side hustles or this Airbnb, and make sure you have an emergency fund just in case of rainy days. Number 4, start investing, which is a big one, and I would always remind you to do that. And lastly, diversify and optimize, so that way you're not caught by surprise on the economic downturns. So let's start off with now our actual presentation. So what is Airbnb? So Airbnb is think of the air bed and breakfast. It's a service that lets property owners rent out their spaces for any travelers, right? So let's say you have an extra garage that you convert into a room, or even your room, right? Maybe you're gone away for the weekend and you can rent it out for some money, or you can rent the whole place, right? And it started in early, I think it's 2009. I started using it in 2013. And my first time was in Chicago because I was running the Chicago Marathon and all the hotels and everything else was booked. So I gave this a shot, and to my luck, the person that was hosting as well, that was their first time. So it was first time hosting and a first time guest, which was myself. And I had a really good experience. So after that, I just decided to stay exclusively at Airbnbs, mainly because a lot of those are very central to the specific locations, right? So at this point, I think I've traveled to more than 23 countries where I've stayed at different Airbnbs. And the main thing is, again, I get to stay close to events of interest, right? So if you're going to, say, Paris, Rome, right, or anywhere else, well, you can find places that are very close to those things that you want to visit, right? So it makes it easier a lot of it is cost savings, right? So you're saving a lot more money on hotels, or at least that's how it used to be. But the main thing is just the location, right? And the second thing is that a lot of times you have great experiences where you get to meet the people that are hosting it, especially if you just rent out a room and you're living in someone else's house. A lot of times they're very, very open to guests, and they're willing to tell you, the spots to go visit or the food to try, and all those things, make you feel a little bit like like a local, right? Kind of give you that experience of the place. So that's the main thing I find value for it, and I hope many of you do too. And the other, just wanted to show you other competitors, right? So maybe you can apply the same things that you're learning today to other booking websites, right? And again, sometimes it's good to have multiple platforms, and that way you can kind of get multiple kind of customers. So that's always a plus. And that's kind of Airbnb in a nutshell. So personally, why did I start, right? So again, like I've shown you sort of my journey, my personal finance journey, right? But the main thing was because my parents retired. So my mom had retired a few years back, and my father was getting close to retirement. So we set up one of the garages and converted into an apartment, which I used to live there, and invested maybe about $20,000 to $30,000 to kind of fix it well. And at some point after I left, we started renting it. And as of now, it's about $1,500 cash flow for them every month, which is not bad at all. And last year I bought a house and I'm renting that out as well. And at the same time, it's paying for itself as well. So that's the biggest inspiration has been my parents, and also my sister started her Airbnb, right? So I'm also trying to influence them to start their own kind of passive or, somewhat passive or actively managed kind of investments as well. But yeah, it's a great way to make extra income if you're looking for this. And obviously, if you're watching this video, you're probably in that same wavelength. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me via DM or just my email address. So yeah, let's stay in touch. So here's some considerations to take before you use Airbnb, right? So first thing is check if you're even allowed to host an Airbnb, right? A lot of the places don't allow for short-term rentals. They might allow for rentals in general, but short-term, I believe by definition is at least 3 or 6 months, if not a year. But that's something that you want to do your homework in, right? Especially if you live in places that have HOAs. A lot of times they don't like that, right? And also keeping in mind that a lot of those communities, they're closed, right? So they're just looking after their people that live there, right? So I don't blame them, but again, do your due diligence, and that's the first thing I would check if you're legally even allowed to have it. The second thing is that Airbnb is providing the platform, right? Even though you're doing all the work. So they will take at least a 3% fee, and there's other fees associated with it. And I'm sure by the time you watch this video, there might be new fees associated with it, right? So you do your due diligence, but as of now, I believe it's just a 3% fee. And if it makes sense for you, then fine, go for it, right? Just like myself. And number 3 is that you have to pay taxes. So by the end of the year, depending on when you start your hosting journey, you get a 1099 form. And within the time that you open the account, you'll get a few weeks, and then they'll send you a reminder to update either your social security number, or if you have a IEN. So let's say if you have an LLC or a similar business, you can use that as well. But make sure you report your earnings. And then number 4, consider that it's not cheap to run it as well, right? So you are running a service, and a lot of times you'll need money for the inventory, for break fix items, right? And for cleaning, right? Especially if you're not gonna do your own cleaning. So keep that in mind and get into the mindset that you are providing a service, right? Just like a hotel or similar, right? So if this is not what you wanna do, right? Then maybe this isn't for you, and that's okay. So more considerations. Sometimes you're gonna get difficult to guess, right? Some of them, depending on where you live, they might be very demanding, right? They might want you to, they might expect a hotel type of experience, right? And sometimes that's not what you're providing, right? And depending on the place that you live, right? For example, my townhouse, it's a very neighborhood, family-oriented place. So definitely not looking for people that want to be really loud, or maybe that they're creating a lot of nuisance around the neighborhoods, because then I'll get the complaints, right? So that's another thing. You're never going to be able to control what kind of guests that you get. And on the other side of the token, you get really amazing guests that they're just trying to either work, they're coming here for the weekend, they're very low key, and they'll leave your place as it is. So those are the best guests that anyone can ask for. But moving on, treat it as a business. For some people, they're just testing it out. Maybe this is a hobby for them, or they just like to host different kinds of people, especially international people that come in. So make sure you get off the mindset of, this is fun, but more so, like I mentioned earlier, to provide a service for your guest. And number 7, make sure that you're investing, right? Again, this is your business. It does bring cash flow into it. So every once in a while, remember to upgrade certain things, maybe repaint it, do a few touches here and there, and that way you can maintain it and maybe take pictures, repost it, so that way you can continue getting guests and your place continues to be booked. So another thing that's fairly new, and I'll touch on this earlier on because this is something that I don't currently do, but I want to do it. And I think if I lived in a different area, I would probably be able to do it better. But Airbnb, there's something called Airbnb Arbitrage. So this is basically, to put it simply, is subleasing, right? So let's say you rent out an apartment and maybe you can't live there anymore, right? Maybe you're moving away. Or maybe your idea is to start an Airbnb, but you don't have the fund to buy a house, right? So the second option would be to look into an apartment, rent it out, and then sublease that to someone else, right? So this is something that a lot of people do in other states, and that works really well for them. But again, check your local laws. And I know some states allow it and some states might not. But again, that's number one, check the property. Number two, come up with a pitch, right? So a lot of places might be close to doing it only because they are not getting they might not be getting a good offer, right? So what I mean with that is that, let's say you're a landlord and somebody, you have a few apartments here and there. Somebody comes up to you and says, hey, can I do subleasing, right? Well, there's not a lot of incentives for that landlord to allow you to sublease, right? Unless you give them a numbers, right? So if you give them a good amount of numbers as far as like projected returns for them, it might make sense for him, right? So if I would say, do your due diligence, run your numbers and say, hey, I want to rent out 2 units and be able to sublease them, right? This is the expected cash flow that I think I can give you. And that way the landlord's gonna get a lot more than they would if they just had regular long-term tenants, right? So the other thing too is, obviously you're investing in the place, in the furniture, and I think if you have that solid pitch, it'll be a lot easier for you to find someone who's gonna let you do it, right? And again, there's a lot of communities like on Facebook groups, Bigger Pockets, and a few other places that you can find those potential landlords, right? Or those folks managing properties like pretty much like apartments. So yeah, do your research, but I think it's something worth looking into, and that's something like I mentioned I'm also trying to do. So let's say that you finally decided to start doing your Airbnb, and at some point you're going to realize that you're going to have to manage it remotely, right? Or as much as you can, unless you live next door and it makes it easier for you. So one of the first things to do is self check-in, right? So one thing you want to do is replace all your key fobs or whatever you have, or actually the keypad, right? So set it up as a numerical one, or if you have a different way for guests to check themselves in, that's going to be the easiest way on you and also for guests, right? And the reason I say that is because you have guests that might come in at 2 in the morning, right? Their flights might have gotten delayed, etc. So not only does it help them, because for them, it'll be an easier way for them to check in. And for yourself, now you don't have to wake up at 2 a.m. and go help your guests, right? And again, you can always follow up the next day. And if you still want to give that sort of that personal experience, that's all up to you. But I'm just saying that this is going to be something that's going to save you a lot of headaches in the future. Number 2, invest in some professional cleaning services. So unless you're doing your own cleaning, right, at some point you will have to, the place needs to be clean at the end of the day, right? So whether that's you or someone else, just find someone who's been doing it, right? For example, I have my neighbor that does it, and she worked at hotels in the past, so she knows exactly what to do, kind of like marking down the inventory and things that I wouldn't even consider, right? So it's always great to have someone that has that prior experience, and especially if you can get someone who's referred, that's even better, right? And the other thing too is, once you get familiar with the application and you understand how it works, you can make them into a co-host, right? So not only can they take the responsibilities of cleaning, but they can also take the responsibilities of helping the guests check in or answer any questions, right? Especially if they live near the property and you live somewhere else. That makes it so much easier. and obviously take care of them, and that way they can help you provide a good service and keep the place clean, right? Number 3, make sure you provide a detailed guidebook to your guests that are coming in. So print out guides, whether that's just standard recommendations of where to go, restaurants, etc., but mainly about the house rules or house guidelines, right? So things like keeping the thermostat at a certain temperature, making it clear that there's no smoking allowed, and things that are important to you that you wouldn't want anyone to do in your home, because at the end of the day, it is your property and they're here staying temporarily, so there's no reason why they should violate your rules, right? So again, just make sure there's no misunderstanding, and later I'll touch on some of the automated messages that you can send to continue reminding them and reinforcing that there are strict rules or guidelines for your property. And number 4, keep a list of inventory. This is something I had to learn later on, as many guests were either losing things like towels or a few things, right, or even staining them really bad. So at some point I would go to the store and buy replacements, right, and that adds up and it takes away from your profits. And at that point, what are you running the service for? So make sure you keep an accurate inventory of it. I would assign a monetary value to it. So if you have a handful of towels, let's say that's $40, etc., right? So I like to print them out near those areas, right, to remind the guests that, hey, we will charge you if you take it, or we will charge you if you stain it so much that it doesn't make sense to try to clean it, right? So the other thing too is that again, as you have a professional cleaning crew, or if it's just someone that make sure they go over the inventory, and that way you can ensure that they didn't lose any items and nothing was damaged, right? And that's one of the most important things. Take pictures and have proof in case you need to submit a reimbursement. Continuing on, set up automated messages. And I kind of touched this briefly earlier. So not only does it help you to remind them about the house rules, but also it gives them a sense that you're connected, right? So even though those are automated, and you take time to set up, the welcome message, the check-in, maybe you have a link to your guidebook, right, or the rules, and then at the end of the checkout, right now, reminding them that to leave the keys in certain place, to close the, maybe turn off the AC, make sure the windows are closed, that sort of thing. Like, it is a lifesaver, I would say. It's because otherwise, you have a guest that's checking out today, you might forget to reply to them. So I would say take some time to set up your automated messages once you start. And also, number 6, the last one is make sure you have someone on standby, right? Maybe you're the person that does the, break fix kind of things, but at some point you might need to get, once you build relationships, right? Maybe you have an electrician or a plumber or someone who can, attend to the guest needs as they have any issues. And moving on, here's some tips. So update your photos. Photos are important because things change, right? And at some point you might shift the layout of your space, right? The furniture, you might paint, you might do things to improve the area, right? I mean, it makes it a little bit easier in the eye. So as people are scrolling through the listings, it's a little more eye-catchy, right? And then they're able to book, right? So make sure you keep your photos up to date and make sure that they represent how your house looks, right? People don't like surprises. And again, too, like I mentioned, take inventory, clean up from time to time, maybe get rid of items, right? You'll figure out what works best for you. Number 3, continue that, maintenance, update the space, etc. And number 4, make sure you listen to your guest feedback. When a guest leaves, they leave you a public sort of feedback, and they also leave you a private one. So make sure you do listen to especially the private ones, because they're trying to help you create a better service. Number 5, work with other businesses for discounts, right? And I would say this is very dependent on the city that you live in, right? So if you live in a very touristy area, right, and you have a favorite coffee shop or something else, maybe you can work out a deal with them where you can refer them and they might get a discount, and then, or you might get some kind of affiliate program, right? So I will look into that as another way to, make some side money as well. Number 6, review your guests as soon as they leave. So this helps in 2 ways. One, you're reviewing the guests and it's fresh, right? So maybe you're walking your property after they leave and you're able to give a more accurate kind of review. And number 2 is that they'll get also a notification that says, hey, your host has reviewed you, but you'll have to leave your review as well if you want to see it. And also, make sure you follow up, because you only have 14 days until they leave so they can give you a review, right? A review. And if you're just getting started, those reviews are pretty essential so that you can continue growing your business and eventually you can become a SuperHost. So number 7, cleaning fees. This is unrelated, but make sure that you account for those fees as well. And number 8, be responsive. So make sure you continue, respond back quickly to your guests, and that way they remember that you're very helpful, etc. So those are some of the things that they're going to leave in your feedback, right? And as more people start looking over your profile, potentially wanting to book your space, they're going to see that Pablo is very responsive, right? Also, it shows them on the statistics. It shows you when a person has like 100% response rate, and all of those kind of criteria are contributions for your overall score, right? So obviously Airbnb is going to give preference to those that have a higher number, right? And because that would typically translate into them being a good host, right? Or providing a good service. Okay. So moving on, here's some tips. Tip number 1, update your photos. So as you're making improvements to your space, maybe you're cleaning or maybe you're restructuring some of the furniture, make sure you keep updating your photos, and it's very representative of your space, right? Because guests don't like any unwanted surprises. They expect to see what they see in the pictures. Number 2, take inventory and declare from time to time, right? So again, going back to keeping track of your inventory, right? Of the costs associated with that inventory, and also buy in bulk, right? This is especially true for things like toilet paper or for cleaning supplies as well. Number 3, repaint the space from time to time, especially as seasons change, right? Taking good pictures with good lighting, painting is gonna be one of those things too. Personally, I've had the space for about 6 months. Sometimes guests might scratch some of the walls, right? And those are the things that we need to keep an eye on and continue to paint. Number 4, make sure you listen to your guest feedback. So when a guest checks out, you get 2 types of reviews, right? One of them is a private review and a public review. So the public review is what typically everyone sees. The private one is typically a note from the guests who stayed to let you know what you can improve on, right? So I would pay a lot of attention to those because they're trying to help the service, right? And make you a better host. So I would definitely listen to those as well. Number 5, work with businesses for discounts, right? So I think this depends a lot on the area that you live in, right? So if there's a lot of local coffee shops or things that are similar to that, maybe you can work with them so your guests can get a free discount, or maybe some type of affiliate program for you to make extra money as well. Number 6, review your guests as soon as they leave, right? So the main thing is that as soon as they leave, right, you can walk through the property so things are fresh in your mind, and it allows you to give a more accurate review. But also, once you're done with your review, your guest is typically going to get a reminder for them to also leave a review for yourself, right? And they have up to 14 days to leave your review. If not, then unfortunately they won't see anything on your public page. And so it's also important to follow up, right? So if the guest hasn't left a review within 2 or 3 or 4 days, I would definitely follow up, right? And then I'll show you some tips later on, some messages that you can do after. And number 7, cleaning fee. So within your listing, when you're setting up your listing, you can add a cleaning fee associated with it, right? So for example, for me, I usually leave it for $40 if they're gonna stay just like for the weekend. But if they're gonna stay for an extended period of time, it might be $50, right? And that money is actually what I'm paying the person that's helping me clean the space, right? So that way it doesn't touch your bottom line numbers, and it makes it worthwhile as well, right? And also because sometimes you have to do very thorough cleaning, and it's gonna take time, and it's gonna be an effort, right? So make sure you are getting compensated for that as well. And number 8, so one of the things that's most important is to be responsive, right? And this is the type of this is what's going to get you to a SuperHost status, right? Because you're going to get rated on it, right? Even if you take too long to respond, right, that's going to contribute to your scoring as well, right? So you want to make sure you're responsive, and also just being a good person in general, because if you're providing a service, the guest expects to get a response, right, for any kind of inquiries that they have. So like I mentioned before, it's important to do things the right way to eventually get to a SuperHost status, right? So one of those things is not canceling, for any particular reason. So the thing I guess one of the worst things you can do is just cancel on someone for no reason, especially if it's longer than like 7 days, right? So as you can see before, you're gonna get penalized for doing so. So you'll get up to $50 if you cancel, 7 days after, remaining that a person is gonna check in, right? And up to $100 if you cancel before 7 days before the guest checks in. So be wary of that there's financial consequences, but also this is gonna impact you when Airbnb decides to do a review of your SuperHost status as well. So the other thing that happens too is if you cancel certain dates, they're going to be blocked, right? Meaning that other people will not be able to book your space during that time. So if you do cancel for whatever reason, make sure you go to the calendar and manually unblock them. Otherwise, they're going to be unavailable and you're not going to get any business. So the other thing that might happen is that they might give you, the guest, even though they didn't stay there, they still have the ability to give you a negative review, which is something that we don't want. And worst case scenario, after 3 or more cancellations, your account might be suspended, and there goes your business. So yeah, take this very seriously, and let's not cancel for any reason. Like I mentioned earlier, people are visiting, right, your space, they're looking at Airbnb instead of hotels because they want to experience the local life, right? So you as your host, a lot of times your city better than anyone else, right? So I recommend to give them a proper guidebook, right? Whether it's something that you actually print out, right, at the space, or if it's something that you just want to add as a description to the app, right? You can do that as well. But I would say, make sure you take care of any questions that they have, right? And at some point, you're going to get the same type of questions. So it's just easier to put them all in like one list, right? So I will cover off things like the supermarkets, pharmacies, things that are a must for people visiting. Touch on your favorite, maybe the best food spots around, right? Also give them a little bit of price range, because some people, they're trying to be a little bit more frugal with their spending, while other people, they don't mind spending a lot of money in high-end restaurants, right? So I will give them, that price range of places, and obviously make sure that they're good, right? Because they might like this place so much that they might come back, and they might come back to stay in your place. Also give them places to, whether it's alcoholic and non-alcoholic places, cafes or breweries are really nice to kind of spend time. And also make sure you do add any sightseeing, right? Whether that's any historical places, landmarks, etc. And finally, people visiting, they love to shop and entertainment. So make sure you also give them those type of options. So just think of the kind of places of interest that you would want to know when you're visiting a place, right? And based on those experiences as well, include those into your guidebook, right? But a lot of them make sure that, you know, it's places that you've tried as well. And that way you can give them very specific recommendations. And going back to the other point I made about working out a deal with those businesses, at some point, maybe you can have some sort of affiliate program as well. So house rules. This is one of the most important slideshows, in my opinion, because the way that you're going to treat a home or a hotel is not the same way that the guests are going to treat your home, right? So you need to be very explicit on what you want them or not allow them to do, because they're going to do it. So I'm just telling you that there's going to be unexpected things that you could have handled if you just set up very explicit rules, right? So here's a few examples. So no smoking indoors at all time. Why? Because the smell is going to penetrate if you have couches, even the walls, right? And depending on how long the guests are staying, that's going to make it even worse. Number two, parties, no parties or events allowed. And you need to be very explicit. Airbnb does offer an option that says for parties or not parties, right? So make sure you have it set to, you know, this house is not set for parties. Unless that is your niche, then things are different, right? But again, you know, other items are going to add like security cameras, and that's going to allow you to see if your guests are having parties or anything like that, right? So that way you can shut it off right before it happens. Number three, limiting the amount of guests. So I limit up to 4 people, right? And I really don't have a problem if they have an additional one, right? But my main concern is to accommodate the guests correctly, right? So if they bring 6 people and they only told me they brought 4, well, they might leave a bad review in terms of, you know, they didn't have enough space, right? But that's not my problem, but I want to make sure that I can accommodate. And if you want, you can have the option to include additional guests at an extra fee, right? So maybe that way it gives you some flexibility in adding an extra bed or whatnot. Number 4, no animals or pets allowed. And again, just remember that this is your property, and especially those that are hosting them in their own space. Don't be afraid to say no to guests with pets, right? It doesn't really change the pricing or anything like that. And unfortunately, if the pets pee or something happens, you know, that smell doesn't go away very easily. Or if it's a cat, etc., they might scratch it, right? And just be aware that even if you have your option set to no pets, people are still going to inquire you. So they're going to send you a message asking if you're okay, you know, maybe this is a service animal or whatnot, right? And again, don't feel compelled to say yes if that's what you don't want to, right? Now, if you do allow pets and whatnot, well, make sure you set it up there, because that's going to bring additional clientele, right? So again, just make sure your house rules are set up very explicit, because you don't want anyone wanting surprises and then you're going to be upset about it. More rules. So number 5, which is a big one, the keys are the guest's responsibility. So make sure you add, you know, a monetary value to it, right? So what I've done recently is I start putting a post, right? I printed out a piece of paper and taped it next to the door. So when a person exits, I make sure I say, hey, lock the door and also take the keys. If you lose the keys, that's $30 extra, right? So I've had 2 guests lose keys in the past. So I make sure I put it in there, so that way when they leave, they see it, right? So there's no excuse, and it's also a reminder for them, right? So again, don't assume that all guests think like you or they're gonna act like you, right? Number 6, no illegal substances are allowed. And I'll leave that up to you. Number 7, have a check-in and check-out time. I tend to follow what most hotels would follow, which is check-in at 3, check-out is at 11 a.m. And the reason why you want to do this is to give yourself some flexibility, especially if you have a guest booking that same day that someone else is going to check out. So it gives you some flexibility as far as cleaning up the house and that sort of thing. So now moving on with the listing. So the most important thing is going to be your photos, right? Making sure that you take good, proper photos, specifically making sure that the room is well lit, right? So that way, when the person's going through your listings, they're able to see how your house looks like, and make sure that it looks exactly how the person is going to see it when they walk in, right? Otherwise, they're going to leave you a bad review to say, hey, the house doesn't match with what we saw in the pictures, right? And number two, you want to make sure that you have a good description, good title and descriptions. So when a person's searching, right, they're going to see the listings based on the location that they're interested in with the pricing and the title, right? So if there's a nurse traveling to your town and they're they're going to be working there for a while, right? Maybe part of the description you can say, it's nearby hospital or, the medical center or whatnot, right? So, and also if you have a beachfront house, right, obviously you want to add that to your description. So make sure it's very relevant to what you're going for, right? Or if you have a specific clientele in mind, then that's going to be key for this. Number three, pricing. So especially when you're getting started, as I did, you might be compelled to add a lower price just to get more clients, but I would say just keep it within average of what's around your area. So maybe look for other homes that are very similar to you. So mine's a 2-story house with 2 bedrooms. So I would compare it with something that's similar, right? I wouldn't compare with a room because those tend to be cheaper. So let's say a room might be $40 a night versus a house that might be $105. That doesn't make sense. So make sure it's very comparable, and your guests are going to be looking for specific things, right? If they have 4 people, they're probably going to look for 2 to 3 bedrooms, and that's where yours is going to pop up. So make sure you give a compared price, but also something that makes sense for you, right? Number 4, you have the ability to block dates. So if there's specific dates, let's say you're planning to go on vacation in December or whatever date you're looking for, you have the ability to block those days. Or let's say you have family come in. So that way, when guests are looking up your listing, they're not going to be able to book those dates, right? And maybe you just want some flexibility. Whenever a guest checks out, you can also block it, so it gives you a day extra for you to take your time and clean up. So that's another idea. So as we're continuing with the photos, just remember, as anything else, it's first impressions, right? So what's gonna capture your guests, your future guests' eyes as they're scrolling down through hundreds and not thousands of listings, right? So make sure you give something that's catchy, or that's gonna get their attention. And again, going back to the photos, make sure when you take the photos, make sure everything's clean, right? There's no trash or there's anything visible that would make the guests think that this house is not clean or whatnot, right? Number 2, utilize what you have. So most of my pictures that you saw are taken with an iPhone, so there's no reason to spend extra money on cameras unless you already have a camera and you know how to take good pictures. Then that's a different story, right? So moving on, number 3, personally, I like natural lights, so I took most of the pictures during the day, right, where I can actually see everything. There is something with artificial light or just general light. There might be a lot of shades and whatnot, so I prefer having natural lights everywhere else. And like I mentioned earlier, your guest is gonna love those bright, clear pictures. And number 4, show some amenities, right? So this is incorrect here, but what I'm trying to say is if you have a pool, if you have a back porch, if you have a grill, show those items so that way people can get an idea of what you have, right? And based on that, just because you might have a grill, that might be the difference between a family going in the holidays and staying at your house versus another house because they don't have a grill or a pool or a front porch or a park nearby. So make sure you include those as part of the amenities. So going with the pictures as well, right? Make sure you take horizontal pictures, not vertical ones. Arrange the pictures based on importance, right? So I like to start with the living room, and then I also give a description under the photos, right? So that helps the guest kind of get an idea of how the house looks like, and what's in the space, right? So for example, in the living room, I add that we have Netflix and a few other things that maybe they might not get an idea if they see it. And like I mentioned, capture the pictures. Use the rule of thirds. So divide the image into 2/3. 2 are going to be verticals and 1 horizontal. So basically, the gist of it is that you want to show the most important things in the middle. And again, take exterior photos, right? A lot of questions I get asked, or I used to get asked before, were about parking, right? So make sure you take a picture of the parking. Don't show the number of the street or anything like that, because they're not supposed to know that information until they actually book it. So just make sure you don't show anything that might identify your house, especially if it's someone local and they might recognize that, right? So don't give anything that has street addresses or a number. That's just something for privacy reasons. But yeah, like I said, take pictures of your outside grill, amenities, and that's gonna get people to book. There you go. So continue with the listing. Make sure you add, for the title and description, when you list them, you can use abbreviations, right? So for example, if you have your apartment, it has AC or including and, right? And the reason is because the space is limited. I think you're limited to 25 characters. You need to check once you start listing, but this is a good, I guess, yeah, this is a good addition to make sure that you don't run out of characters. And use catchy words such as convenient, modern, spacious, rustic, historic, and stay away from generic words, right? Because most 95% of the people in Airbnb are going to be using other words like, good, nice, and great, and that's not really going to stand out. And here it goes. It's actually 50 characters. Again, going back to the unique amenities, I think that's a big selling point. So that's why I keep bringing it up here, right? Don't use all caps because we don't want anyone to get offended. We're not yelling at anyone. And customize your title for your audience. So like I said before, maybe you live close to the rodeo, right? So during the rodeo time, maybe you want to update your listing and say, we're close to the rodeo. Maybe we're close to the medical center, or maybe you're close to the airport, right? And make sure in your description you add how far those places of interest are. Continuing with the essentials and amenities. So the next slide, I'm going to go through it fairly quickly, but these are just some of the ideas of the things that you should include in your listing, right? And then some of them you might think are optional, but I think they're pretty essential, and vice versa, right? But I think what you want to think about this is, even if everything that I show you isn't what you were expecting, maybe you just do a quick Google of other Airbnbs and for you to get an idea what you should include, right? The way I approached this was I wanted to see, I remember hotels where I stayed, and the things that I knew were essential, I included them. And things like, first aid kits, smoke alarms, those are required. So make sure you definitely have those, right? But things like, washer, dryer, right? If you don't have those and there's a washateria 5 minutes away, maybe you just want to include that information, right? There's no need to go and buy the washer and dryer, right? Maybe as your business grows and gets better, then maybe that's something you can add in the future. So again, don't take this as 100% need to follow, and we'll do whatever works for you. So some home essentials like AC, obviously, cleaning products, cooking basics, especially if they're staying extended periods of time, and there are things like Wi-Fi and etc. So feel free to take a screenshot of this, or later I can provide a spreadsheet with these items as well. Again, safety kit is required. I would also include carbon monoxide alarms, smoke alarms, and security cameras later, so that way you can keep track of your property, right, and easily see when guests are checking in or when they check out. And the reason is the guests are not going to tell you when they check out all the time, right? So it might be easier to just look at the camera, and then that way you can go and clean and check how they left your space. Some living room essentials: sofa, coffee table, TV, pens and pencils, extra items like entertainment systems. Bathroom essentials: body soap, cleaning products, etc. I also include a bidet on mine. Some bedroom essentials, so make sure you have towels, bed sheets, linens, etc. And like I mentioned before, your house might be a little bit different from everyone's. If you live in an apartment complex, maybe they have exercise equipment and other things. Kitchen essentials, extra items, and let's move on. So now I touched a little bit of pricing earlier, but now let's dig a little bit deeper on it, right? So like I mentioned, make sure that you do one-to-one comparison when you're ready to put your listing online, and make sure it's pretty comparable, right? So what I would say is start with the idea of how much do you want to make a month, right? So for my apartment, I want to make sure that I get $1,500, and if I get that, I'll be happy, right? Even if it's, maybe weekend stays, right? I don't necessarily need to have it for the whole month to make that amount, but whatever makes sense to you, right? So for me, the pricing to get me to that point is $70 a night, right? And obviously I do long-term discounts and whatnot, but just in general, start with a number that you want to make, right? And make sure it's realistic, obviously. So number 2, apply long-term discounts. So I typically give 11% discounts for weekly stays, and that's longer than 7 days, and also 31% for long-term stays. And the 31% gets me to those $1,500, right? So if the nightly rate is $90, right? Well, that's going to be a lot more than $1,500. So that's why if I apply 31%, it's a little bit of psychology. People know that they're getting a good deal as well. Number 3, account for property maintenance costs. So I had a need to call a plumber, right? So make sure you build those relationships, right, with electricians, plumbers, and if you can do it yourself, then that's going to save you a lot more money, right? So I try to do as much as I can by myself, but I did have some guests damage my wall, right? And part of the patchwork, I didn't feel 100% comfortable because I had some guests staying, like 2 days after that. So I ended up asking someone else to come and do it. And that's additional spending, right? And again, moving on, number 4, adapt your pricing to, so pretty much it fluctuates, right? Airbnb has an automatic feature to set, the pricing, but I personally don't like that because sometimes it makes the pricing so low, which might hurt your bottom line, the number that I mentioned earlier that you should have in mind. And specifically, there's big events like here in Houston, we have the rodeo, we have the Houston Marathon, and a few other events, conferences, which happen yearly. So you understand your city better than anyone does. So make sure you can adjust the pricing for specific dates, right? And also the weekends. And again, account for other fees, right? Airbnb gives you an option to add a cleaning fee. So I tend to set mine to $40 because I do have someone helping me. So after someone's gone, that's how much I get charged, usually $40 to $60, depending on how clean or not clean the space is. So make sure you account for the cleaning services. And moving on, what is instant booking? So a little bit background on this. So in the past, there used to be there were cases in which host wouldn't allow certain people, right? So they were pretty much based on discrimination, right? So if there was an African American person booking it, the host would get the request, and a lot of times they would decline just for that criteria, which later on Airbnb battled this by coming up with instant booking, which I think it's great because from a guest perspective, I can just book a place automatically like I would do a hotel, right? Which makes sense. And some of the pros here is that the algorithm is going to favor your listing because, well, that's my observation. It might not be 100% in Airbnb, but I do get a lot of instant bookings, and especially last minute, right? So sometimes you might have days where you have gaps, right? Let's say a Wednesday and a Thursday, you don't have anyone, but a Friday, someone's going to stay. Well, just because you have it set to instant booking, a guest might just book it on that Wednesday, right? Wednesday and Thursday, and now you have two, right? And there's a difference between instant booking and an inquiry. So an inquiry is when you as a guest find a space, but you might have questions, right? And then from the host perspective, it gives you a chance to chit chat with them before you approve or deny, right? And on the newer, more recent changes, as the host, I can see the picture of the person, etc. So I think they took some of those lessons learned from the instant booking and they applied it to the inquiries as well. But with the inquiries, you can ask the person, what are you looking for, etc. Right? And if it's not a good match, you can decline it, right? But with instant booking, it's pretty much going to get booked automatically. So again, some of the pros is that you're going to get more bookings, and they don't want to, communicate a lot with the host, right? They just want to book a place, stay, and leave, right? Now, some of the cons is that I might get requests instant booking for 60 days ahead, right? So now in my head, I'm thinking, okay, 2 months from now, a person's going to stay and whatnot, right? As time progresses, they're just going to cancel it, right? And there's really nothing, and your dates become available again, so anyone can book it. So it doesn't really hurt us or anything like that, but that is just, I guess, a downside to this, that as easy as they booked, they could cancel it just as easily as well. So anyways, that's pretty much the con of that. And some of the lessons learned here, for me, is one, the dynamic pricing, right? As I mentioned, I think the best thing is for you, as you gain more experience, to fix the pricing to what it makes sense to you, especially if it's seasonal, especially if there's events. And again, don't undervalue your pricing, right? When I first started, I set my pricing to $40. My place got booked quickly for the next 3 months. And looking back, I realized that's lost revenue because I undervalue my property, and I wanted to get a first, few reviews to keep it going, but I realized, looking back, I didn't. So make sure you stick to your guns as far as the pricing that realistic pricing that you set. So if it's $1,500, then do the math, right? Number two, the reviews are important. So some of the guests will leave, right? And I always give them a review. So right after they leave, either myself or my helper go and check the property, and we say, okay, yeah, this is good. And she might tell me, yeah, they took a towel, right? Or they left the place pretty clean, whatever it is. I give them a quick review. And some of them might give you a quick review as well, or they might take a day or two, which is normal. But for those guests that take longer, one of the things I wasn't doing is reminding them. So now what I do is I remind them the day after. So I will touch a little bit on the automated messages, but I usually say, hey, hopefully you had a good stay, etc. I would appreciate if you give me private feedback, and also give us a feedback as is going to help us continue growing our space for other guests and whatnot, right? And part of that too is to encourage them to give you honest feedback to continue improving your service, right? Because you are in the service industry and you want to make sure that you improve for other future guests. And number 3, with instant booking, you have some settings, and I would say this is the most important thing too, is that to reduce the risk of having bad experiences, right? Because what some people might do is that they might create a profile for the purpose of just going and stealing your place, or to have a party or whatever it is, right? Because they can create an account and there's basic verification, right? So what I like to do for the instant booking is I like to just allow guests that have stayed at other properties before, and that way it makes me a little more comfortable, because I can read prior reviews of other hosts, which typically might say, hey, yeah, we would definitely host this person, or they might say, they were a little bit difficult, but whatever, right? So those are some of the indicators if the person's a good fit for you or not, right? So make sure that I would greatly advise you to revisit those settings and see what makes sense for you. So now we move to SuperHost. So again, I stress the importance of getting reviews, right? And also listening to feedback. And the point of this is that it's going to allow you to get to a SuperHost status. And this is someone that, you're a good host, you're providing a good service, and you have the amenities that people are expecting. You're very responsive, which is probably the most important thing, right? And this is how it works. So Airbnb checks your performance for the past, right? Over the past 12 months, every quarter. So every 3 months. And these are some of the dates. And you really don't need to do anything. You just need to, again, be responsive, provide a good service, etc. And in the next 3 months or so, Airbnb might make you a SuperHost automatic, right? So again, there's nothing that you really need to do, right? But there are some requirements. So some of the requirements is that there needs to be at least 10 trips or 3 reservations that last or exceed 100 nights. Maintain a 90% rate response or higher. So try to respond if you can, within a day, but honestly, replies as soon as you can. Otherwise, I'm the kind of person that forgets, right? So if I see the message and I open it and I find a reply, I might forget about it, right? And if you have a co-host, maybe you can work out an agreement to say, hey, from 5 p.m. to 12 a.m., you reply. And from other times, I reply, right? That way, you know that the guest is going to get a response regardless. Make sure you maintain a 1% cancellation rate. So again, don't cancel if you don't need to, right? If anything, let the guest cancel. And if they need to resolve something, they can always resolve it through Airbnb help within themselves. Maintain a 4.8 overall rating, and this is going to be based on the guest, right? So if you didn't have enough kitchen towels or things like that, those are things that the guest might rate you less on. They're going to rate you on the cleanliness, on the accuracy, and the communication of you as a host. And is it worth it? I think it's worth it because once I became a SuperHost, I would say I started getting bookings really quickly, especially during the time that I was listing my second property. That made it much, much quicker. So I want to touch on Airbnb reimbursement. So Airbnb has something you call air cover, and that's the way of having an insurance to protect you and protect the guests for any unexpected accidents, right? So if you ever have an issue, right? I had an issue recently where my guests, they took a few towels, the ones that they left, they were very dirty and it was really hard to get those cleaned up. So I ended up buying new ones because I had a guest staying day after that. And like I said, they damaged the walls, they took the keys and a few other things, right? So this is actually my first time going through this. And what I learned from this was to take pictures, right? So take inventory of everything that you got, which we covered earlier, and make sure you know what you have. And if you have a person helping you, maybe give them a checklist of everything, right? The number of people that are staying. So if there's 3 people staying, I used to leave extra towels, etc. Now I don't. I just leave the exact amount. So that way you can account very quickly, right? And you have typically, now they changed it to, I believe you have up to 60 days to submit a claim, but I would submit it right away, right? That way, if the guests knew they did something wrong, they're most likely not gonna fight you about it, right? But anyways, once a guest leaves that, they destroy your place or they took items or they broke something, right? Make sure you go to the resolution center. It's going to be you can either do through your app or the web, but it's somewhat limited. So you're going to have, let's say towels. So you type towels and it says lost, stolen, etc. So you select the item and then you select the monetary value, and then they're going to ask you for proof, right? Which is typically just pictures. And if you bought something to replace it, you're going to need the receipt. So 2 things that you need is pictures and a receipt. And you have a little bit of room to add details, right? But make sure, like I said, the main thing you need to do is to take pictures and have good inventory of your items that you have, right? Now, I guess touching on air cover, they claim that they provide up to 1 million of damage protection, but if you look into Facebook groups, other places, some people have good experiences with it, some people don't. I got my money within 2 hours of submitting my claim, but then mine was pretty straightforward, I feel. So it just really depends on your experiences. Hopefully you don't have bad experiences. But the other thing I was gonna say is make sure you're getting renter's insurance, right? So go back to the video, or if you're looking at the presentation, and part of your due diligence, right, of your list that you need to do, to understand what do you need before you start as a host, make sure you see if it makes sense for you to get renter's insurance, which you should, but unless you live there, obviously. But also when you're talking to the renter's insurance, make sure you ask for short-term rentals, right? So do your research and see where air cover would fill in the gap for things that your insurance doesn't, and vice versa, right? So maybe you don't need to pay a lot for your renter's insurance short-term rentals. I think that one's a little bit higher, but just talk to your insurance and see what makes sense for you. So now we're moving to the automated messages. So what are automated messages? Well, as you get more bookings, you'll start realizing that you end up sending different kinds of messages, or the same type of messages all the time, right? So typically when a person books your stay, I usually ask them, hey, we're glad to have y'all. How many people are you bringing? What brings you to town, etc., right? And once they check in, I usually give them check-in instructions, right? Specifically on the property that I'm not there, because I have a keypad. So I want to make sure that I send them the message. Here's the check-in instructions, click here, etc. And then after the checkout, I usually say, hey, don't forget that tomorrow you check out at 11. Make sure you leave the keys on the table. And after the checkout, I usually follow up with a, hey, give us a review, right? And tell us what we, did well, what we didn't do well, so we can continue improving. So those messages get pretty tiring pretty quickly. So you want to make sure that you set up automated ones, right? And this is probably going to take you, 25 minutes to set them up, but it's worth it because it's going to save you a lot of time. So here's some examples of when to send them, right? So I call them triggers. So one is the pre-booking, when they first confirm the stay, during the check-in to remind them about the house rules, which it's a really important ones, right? Make sure that you remind them about the house rules so that way they can actually read it, as some guests do not read it, right? And that's when you have to go and print out the rules to make sure that they don't miss it. And another one too that I like is to include the Wi-Fi information as well. And if they use the app before, they know how to navigate it, right? But if they don't, it makes it easier for them to just see it there. Also, the night before checking out, which is where you thank them and you remind them to leave the keys and to check out before a certain time, and the checkout process and after the checkout. So here's a few of them. I'm going to go through them fairly quickly. Take a minute to look at it. So initially, when they first confirm, automated message to let them know that thank you for booking, here's a check-in time, and I'll send you the instructions one day before you actually check in. Number two, this is a reminder to let them know to check in after 3, because a lot of times guests might want to stay before. So remind them, especially if you're at work or you can go and help them check in. That's really important to keep reinforcing that. Give them all the check-in instructions that you need. Give them extra instructions if needed. So specifically, if, for example, I include a picture of the day and a night of where to go, because obviously some guests might arrive in the middle of the night, but make sure you're very thorough with the check-in and it's easy to read. Again, the checkout reminder, let them know that they need to leave before 11 a.m. or whatever time you decide. And also to remind them about leaving you a review. And finally, now that you've gone through all this presentation, it's time to publish your listing. So here's, I just summarized it a bit because this might change in the future. I didn't want to go through the whole process of it, but just go to Airbnb, start your host experience, and it's going to walk you through this 10 steps, right? Of identifying the type of place you're offering, if it's a full house, a room, etc. What best describes your space and location, how many guests, amenities, etc. So pretty straightforward, and I'm sure that by this time you got it. So we finally reached the end of the presentation here, and my recommendation again is just get started. You might not feel confident about it initially, right? But maybe I will recommend next time you travel somewhere, or even within your own town, book an Airbnb for the weekend and then see what experience you have there, right? See if you can book a room. Maybe you'll feel comfortable doing a share room. And a lot of those hosts might have experience already. So sometimes you might end up going to a place that you paid for one room, but you have access to the whole house. And the host might be out of town, so you actually have the whole space for yourself, but you paid a significant price for it, right? But the point of that is mainly for you to get an idea of how it is to go through the Airbnb experience, and if it's something that you think it's for you, right? The other thing too is look into the Airbnb Arbitrage, which I touched earlier, and see if subleasing options are an option, right? Sometimes corporate owned apartments might not do it, but if you're driving through your neighborhood and you see like a 6-unit apartment or something, you might go and talk to the actual owner. And if they're having problems with vacancy, you can say, hey, well, I'll book it for 1 year. And that way you have, you're going to get paid for a year, but I'm going to be doing this sub-leasing, right? And they might not care because they just want to make sure that the place is filled the whole year. Also, again, don't undervalue your property. Come up with a number that makes sense for you. Maybe that's going to give you some net profit, and then stick with that, right? And also, don't be afraid to increase the prices during events or the weekend. the diligence piece of it, like I mentioned, they do have the option to have instant booking, but maybe you're not going to be a good fit, or they might not be a good fit for you, right? So I would do my due diligence to make sure that the guests are a good fit for you. And if you don't have a good gut feeling they inquire, feel free to deny, right? Don't feel like you have to accept all of them. Again, for me, I get a lot of requests to bring pets, right? Or to bring extra people or whatnot. So feel free to just decline it, because it is your space and it should be respected, right? And lastly, again, pay attention to reviews, right? So I touched on the idea of the mindset, right? And remind yourself that you're providing a service. So don't take things personal, right? Sometimes guests are gonna leave, the sheets really dirty. They're not gonna pick up after themselves, or whatever they might do, right? So just realize that you're providing a service. This is a business. This is making your money. So don't take it personally and just do the job, right? Set up for the next guest. And if you do have reviews, which is actually a good thing, then that's going to help you improve your service and get better bookings, and ultimately allow you to make more money, right? As more people are staying. And then at some point you realize that this is a good place for you, right? And you can increase the pricing and make a little bit more money. So that's it. And I guess the only thing I have to say is best of luck, and you got this. And if you have any questions, feel free to DM me on Instagram, or just send me an email, or let's set up a one-to-one consulting call and I can help you and walk you through it. And that's it. And hope you like the presentation, and tell your friends and family about it, because I've gotten my siblings into it now and they seem to be enjoying this, and obviously it's an extra income, and part of the abundancia mindset is to increase our side hustles, but mainly our income streams, right? So take care and good luck.